Hey everyone, welcome to episode 13 of the Miami Tech Pod. I'm Cesar Fernandez, and I am joined by Brian Breslin and Maria Durchi. Will is on vacation this week, but we're also joined by Evan Leaphart, the CEO of Kiddie Kredit. Kiddie Kredit is trying to rethink how we teach financial literacy to our country's youth. And Evan, we're delighted to have you on the pod.
Appreciate y'all having me.
Definitely. But look, before we start, I think it's really important for us to tell our listeners, why we didn't record an episode and release it last week. This was kind of a really unexpected and tragic reason, but as a lot of people in the Miami tech community have learned and found out, that Aaron Hirschhorn, who is the CEO of Dog Vacay, an entrepreneur, kind of visionary founder in a lot of ways, was tragically killed in a boating accident. So it just didn't feel right. We wanted to kind of respect that, the events and honor him and his family as they were going through a really tough time. So I know that Maria, Brian, and Evan, you all have known or knew of Aaron for a while. Do you want to kind of share a little bit about the positive things about your interactions with him, just to really honor his life?
Yeah. So I met Aaron about 2.5 years ago when he had recently moved to Miami with his family. He was always incredibly gracious, and we asked him to be a speaker at Refresh, and he jumped at the opportunity and did an incredible job, spoke to a packed house. And we've been working on kind of a piece that we're going to be releasing soon on Refresh, just honoring his memory. And so we were collecting stories from different folks in the ecosystem on their experience interacting with Aaron. And everybody we asked is kind of said the same thing about how generous he was with his time. And he just was really, had this love of life and was just really excited to help other entrepreneurs. I think he was incredibly humble, and we're all a little, the whole ecosystem is worse off for having him, not with us anymore. And so we're all just trying to process it, but also, pay homage to, his just happiness always when you would talk to him. So it's incredibly tragic. And I think that it's just been a really rough time. And hopefully, we'll all heal and honor his memory by paying forward to future entrepreneurs and helping other entrepreneurs in the ecosystem grow. I know, Evan, I think you had a great story you told us right before we started recording on your interactions with him.
Yeah. First, my condolences to his family. And when I met Aaron, it was initially through 500 Startups Miami Bootcamp. And, we were really, really early with our build out and concepts of what we were trying to do. And when I felt that we were, ready to raise, he was literally the first person I reached out to, the first person I ever had this is what we're doing, we're looking for investors conversation, was with him on the beach at lunch. And, gave very candid feedback on these are the things you could be looking for. And I always tried to keep him up to date with our growth and what we were working on. And I, got a chance to see what he was working on with his second startup. I believe it was Galat. And I appreciated his energy. And then, that the meetup that we had for dinner, I think a month or two ago, that was my first time seeing him in a while. And he was just in really great spirits. There's people that you see and you're just excited to see. They're just, good balls of energy. And he's definitely one of those people, so, I know if it affects me this much, there's people that know him way deeper than I do and are truly affected because he had a kind spirit. And I just, my heart goes out to all of them and just hope as a community, in the manner of how it happened, there's things we can do to ensure that things like that don't happen going forward. So I would just say rest in peace and my condolences to his family.
Yeah, well said, man.
One of my big takeaways from Aaron was when I first met him was at a dinner that Maria had organized years ago, and I had no idea who he was because I didn't bother to read bios or read anything about who was coming to this dinner. I just showed up because I was like, free food, yay! But he was so down to earth, and so like unassuming, and that he wasn't offended that I had no idea who he was. Even though he was the guest of honor at the dinner. And like, I was always impressed by his vibe, his energy, and my heart goes out to his wife and his 3 kids, and the rest of their family that are left behind. I think if there's anything though we can take away from this is let's hope that his legacy continues, and that his name lives on continues to be for positive things, and I think there's some activity around working on boating safety and boating or ocean safety issues in his name, which I think we'll start seeing more around that soon. Like what we were saying before the pod started, that like it's crazy out there on the water sometimes, and this is one of our greatest assets here, and it's such a shame that it takes such a tragic loss for us to sort of open our eyes to like how dangerous this is and how like we need to make sure we protect our people and our and our environment and all that stuff. So if I was drinking, I'd pour one out for him right now, I guess. But I think all we can do is aspire to have the same positivity and impact that Aaron had.
Yeah, well said, Brian. I think it's really really nice for you all to share the stories. I also met when I met Aaron, I was kind of like struck. I was like, man, this guy is pretty fearless, because he had a big exit and he was like, okay, on to the next challenge, right? I want to like figure out pet stem cells or something like. I have a regulatory background, as we've talked about in the show, and I was like, man, like the amount of regulatory hurdles around like stem cell research and different treatments of animals, and like how regulated veterinary medicine is all over states. And I was like, that's a huge, like, there are tons of hurdles. And he's like, yep, we're going to solve them. And I think that's the really cool kind of like, like change the world attitude that he had. It was pretty neat to witness for sure.
But I think it's worth talking about Gallant, the name of his company, which was on Shark Tank. For those who caught that episode, it was interesting when he was telling me about that idea. It was like, he's like, sure. Think of it was almost like a Tesla strategy, in that like here was a group with a lot of disposable income who are willing to spend to fund this type of research, and the long game though was that eventually that research would translate to humans and human life extension and curing diseases and things like that, because there isn't a commercial way to easily sort of get consumers to spend money and invest in these technologies and stuff like that. It's all dependent on government or big pharma and stuff like that. And so he was using a very clever way to basically build up a lot of the baseline research in one area that can then be applied to another area and impact millions and millions of people, and that's not to, belittle the fact that he'd improve a lot of people's lives by improving the lives of their pets. But he told me his goal was ultimately figure this out in pets, and then after we can figure it out for humans.
Yeah, I didn't know that. That's even more impressive.
That's
it's
awesome.
Super strategic. It's
Mm-hmm.
awesome. Aaron, you're in our thoughts. We will do our best to make you proud and make sure we continue like supporting entrepreneurs here in this city. And speaking of, Evan, you're with us here on the Miami Tech Pod. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about your story in entrepreneurship? But kind of from the beginning, right? Like where you got started, where you're from, all of that.
Yep. So I've been in Miami for 17 years now. A year break in LA. Me and Aaron bonded about that too, talking about LA. But I I was born in Pittsburgh and diehard Steelers fan. No, I have no beef with the Dolphins. But I grew up in Maryland in a city called Columbia, not too far from Baltimore, not too far from DC. And then I came out here for college in 2004 to go to FIU. Didn't finish, but my major was entrepreneurship. So I guess I'm pretty on brand with how I thought when I was 18. Um, but I've always been that type of person, a very entrepreneurial spirit. I got it from my mom. Grew up, single mom. My mom lived I lived with her in Maryland, and then my dad lived in New York. And but I really just saw from her being a flight attendant and being gone so many days, but always trying to like work her hardest to bring things to the table, just really made me pretty independent. So that was where I got it from. Had a lemonade stand, built a computer from scratch when I was like 14 years old, not because I was like a super tech mind at that time. I wanted to have the fastest CD burner in school to like sell CDs to my friends.
We just talked about this the other day because I posted like who remembers this on Twitter, and it was like a CD burners, but like the standalone ones. You remember those?
Yep, I do.
What was your speed of because I completely forgot that it took forever to burn
Bro,
CDs.
that was the thing. So I had a Pentium 4, and then I had TDX had the only 40X CD burner at the time. So I was a telemarketer. So I was like working my butt off to be able to pay for it. And then so I got it. So I had my little standard CD-ROM, but then the TDX CD burner, and then I had Napster. And I would just come home and I would just try to like outburn CDs from all my friends. I had the Jewel CD cases. They had the paper ones.
Yes.
Evan, what year was this?
Bro, when was this? Like 2002?
Oh man, I was doing that 5 years before that on a 2X or 3X burner, and I used to sell CDs, bootleg CDs, to like my classmates in high school in the late 90s. Yep. And I even sold them to like the security guards at the high school, and I was like, there's something that feels really wrong about this. But
no, guys, the statute of limitations is passed. Like Sean Parker's a billionaire, he's like 4 companies ago, like we're good. We can talk about how we used to bootleg sell CDs all over Miami. So sorry, we jumped in, but I thought it was a really important rabbit hole.
I'm glad to know I wasn't the only one in the world.
Maria, did you burn CDs?
I did, but I don't remember if I actually had my own burner. I don't know. I just bought them off of Brian.
you mooched.
We did not go to the same high school, Maria, so that was not possible.
My high school is Brian then.
All right, Evan, continue with your story.
Nah, man. So I had, what was my business model then? I think I charged $7 for like the CDs with like that were already made, and then if you needed a mix, it was 10.
That's the premium.
Yeah, it was doing okay. Yeah, the mix, because that took time. You had to pay for the sweat equity.
And it was like multi-platforms, right? It wasn't just Napster. There was like Cesar and like others.
That's right. I forgot about Cesar. Yeah. I remember LimeWire. I feel like LimeWire was a little later, but you're right. I remember Cesar.
Yeah. Okay. And so that was like post lemonade stand. That was the other business that you learned the ropes with.
Yeah. And then so then sell stuff on eBay and things like that. But in the meantime, in between time, I bounced around between different jobs, but it was always kind of a sales entrepreneurship type track, right? Like I always think that those are two professions to where how hard you work, it's like a direct correlation to your compensation. And like I was like, I'm never going back to Maryland, right? Like I love home, but I just was like super adamant about like, I'm gonna make it here. I'm gonna figure it out. So I would say around like 2010, I was at a telemarketing job. I was selling DirecTV, and then I was thinking about what was I doing before? I had like a T-shirt company. It was called Strios. It was like the acronym was shirts that reflect an individual's own style, right? So the whole goal of it, I thought, was like basically, look, why don't we just have people submit their own designs, and then whatever designs get the most votes, we'll make that a T-shirt. I thought it was like the most revolutionary thing ever. And then somebody I was talking to, they're like, wait, you mean like Threadless. And I, like, my whole world was crushed. Like, I knew nothing about like competition. I was like, this is already being done. It's over. So like I had before, like, so even when I started to go down that path, I was at a sales job. I might have had like $6,000 saved up. So I'm like, okay, I got a cushion to like start. I had this business plan, which at the time, business plans were longer. It wasn't a pitch deck or a one sheeter. So I had this like 35-page pitch deck. And I was like, all right, cool. So I'm gonna just quit now. I'm gonna raise $1 million within the next month or 2 months. Super naive. I'm still naive when I did Kiddie Kredit, but I was like, so I raised $1 million and then we just start. And then like clearly that didn't happen. But what I realized along that way too was like when I tried to get a business loan or like a line of credit, I was already making stupid decisions like the moment I turned 18, so my credit was already shot. And then but I realized, one, it was because I was making a lot of mistakes, but two, I really had no idea what credit was. And me always believing in the power of entrepreneurship and me thinking like it's like one of the key things that we could do for economic equality is to have more entrepreneurs, right? Like there's not as many background checks for an entrepreneur. If you've done things that just kind of change the trajectory of where you can actually get a job in corporate, entrepreneur gives you the same abilities. So I'm just, thinking like going down that rabbit hole of thought. I was like, but we need to teach people about credit. So if they don't have, money from aunt, uncle, mom, dad, they can go to a bank and get a traditional loan or line of credit to start their business. So I was like, but how do you teach it earlier on? And this whole thought process is going on in between my calls, right? Like I'm a telemarketer. And so I'm like, maybe through chores. So I was like, okay. And then I came up with, I was like, what's a cool little name? It was like Kiddie Kredit. So that was where it started. I think I did a draft of a Kickstarter campaign in like 2012. I don't think the link is active anymore. I'm gonna try to find it, but it was terrible. It was like it made no sense. It was like for like $1,000, you were on like the board of directors. All we needed was like 10,000 to like be the next. It was pretty ridiculous. But
I feel like there's some guy out there who's like, when the hell is the board meeting? I've been waiting for 7 years now for this board meeting to take place. Evan keeps dodging me on this old ass AOL email that I have of his or something.
Right. Reach out to him via CompuServe. So like I never launched it, but like I that was like how long ago I thought of the concept. But like building an app was the most foreign thing to me ever.
What year was that?
Man, I think this was like 2010, 2011 when I started thinking about it.
About credit as a kind of barrier to success and mobility in our economy, right? Like,
yeah, it was all like, I would say this was probably like 2 minutes of dialogue in my head, but it was an aha moment for me. It was like, what could you do? Like chores, the Kiddie Kredit. That sounds great.
So when did you, because that's really interesting to me. Like there's a lot of people that have really good ideas and know that the next step is, okay, like I'm going to go execute this and make this a business. I'd love to know how long it took to actually take that leap for you, right? Like when did you start Kiddie Kredit?
So it was like 8 years later.
8 years.
I had, like when I like really, founded it officially and like started going down that path. But I look at our Twitter and like I opened that in 2013. But I wasn't doing anything, I didn't really know which direction to go, but it was around 2017 where I was like, look, you've been working with, like, you understand your audience a little while, like you've been, mentor to youth for a couple of years. You've seen your credit score, go up and down. You know what it takes to make a good credit score now at this point. I think it's a good point for you to start this. You have a little money saved, go ahead and give it a shot. So then I, started going down that path, drawing out wireframes, getting some of the designs done. And then in 2018 was like when we officially founded. So it was me and a buddy of mine, Matt Cohen. He had built an app a couple years prior. It's called Roll Random. It was like a social networking app for ravers and like party goers. And it scaled to like over 100,000 users. So he really just understood what it took to build a tech startup as like a non-technical founder. Like I knew nothing, you know. I didn't know the 0 to 1 books to read the lean startups. Like I was super out of the loop of what it took to be like a tech founder. But I learned pretty quickly, you know, thanks to him. And then from there, we really started to dig in. You know, and it was us. We would say, look, we have this clickable prototype. We now need to find our CTO. Our CTO, we were introduced to by Carlos Vasquez, who's down here. We participated in the Miami EdTech program with him, and he was like, I think I know a guy, because we went all the way from saying, are we going to get this? We're going to get a developer overseas, or we're going to find somebody in the States. Like, but the ultimate goal will be to have somebody in house, and through him, we were able to find Vic, and then we started plugging away, and then we launched the public beta in 2019.
And how would you describe the business? The way, I mean, for our listeners, you know, and by the way, we like a couple of episodes ago, we highlighted you all won the TechCrunch competition, and we'll talk about that in a second. But you know, explain Kiddie Kredit the way you'd be pitching a VC. Like, how would you describe the problem you're solving, the actual product, the business, all of that?
Yeah, so Kiddie Kredit, it's in short a chore tracking app that teaches kids about credit, where the premise of the app is the better a kid does their chores, the better their quote unquote credit score. So like a missed chore is like a missed payment. The longer you've had a chore is like the longer you've had a credit card. And anytime a kid says, hey mom, can I get this? Hey dad, can I get this? It's like an inquiry. Contrary to popular belief, the business model is not B2C though, it's B2B2C. So we work with organizations and municipalities that are looking for unique ways to engage with their intended audience. So we have clients that are lined up for this year so far, like Equifax Foundation, YMCA, and a couple others. The way that it works for them and how we actually monetize is essentially the organization is paying to be able to tap into the family unit and add additional activities and or chores for the kids to do. So if I'm a parent, I see Adam clean room, Adam make bed, Adam YMCA camp, Adam take out trash. I'll have parental control over those chores except for the one of the organization. If I want a more comprehensive view of what they're doing, I would then tap on that line item and it would do API pulls from the organization itself. So charging $50 per year per family unit for that. And then what we're building out in the app is like a product recommendation engine. So think like a Credit Karma for families, where we'll recommend different products based off of geolocation, age, and express need to the parents.
That's amazing. That's really, really neat. Man, you've thought about the one thing I was thinking is like how, you know, this is already a hard problem in society, right? Like no one wants to admit that they need to gamify credit a little bit. And because there's a little bit, and this is my take, but I'd love to get your opinion. Like, is there a little bit of like a self-awareness factor for parents where they're like, man, this needs to be really, really important of my child, because like this is how the world works, right? Our economy is built on debt. Like, you know, in order to get that debt, you need a good credit score, et cetera. Is that why you want to kind of use other business partners as the distribution strategy, or is it more, you know, it's just kind of like growth hacking, right?
No, so it's three buckets, right? So it's kind of yes to both, right? So, you know, purely business wise, like sure, we feel B2B2C has lower acquisition costs, so we can get, you know, growth in numbers early on with, you know, an eventual B2C once you kind of reach that adoption point. But looking at it even deeper, and it's more mission aligned than that, is the audience that needs to learn about credit the most is like not the audience that should be paying like monthly for anything else, right? Like when you look at the wealth gap that exists, right? And we can point out stats about like how in communities of color, average net worth is this, white households, average net worth is this. Like a big portion of that is home ownership. But like what's the key thing that you need to actually buy a home is a good credit score, right? So we talk about financial literacy as a whole, but like we really don't give just tackling the problem through the lens of credit, like enough do. And that's why I try to, magnify the conversation to say, like, if we really want to address economic equality, we should really be talking about credit, not just like saving. You can't, I don't say this to offend, but if you really think about it, it's like you can't save your way out of poverty. Like there has to be something that kind of like lifts you out of that situation and creates that generational wealth. And that's typically through ownership of some form or fashion. And if you don't have the capital to build something of significant ownership, you don't get there 9 times out of 10. So
I'm like super passionate about this. So I'm going to talk a lot. Brian and Maria jump in, but there's a company that I worked with that just, fell victim to the pandemic and didn't make it. But they're very large. They're, I think, $200 million market cap. First called Inseeked, then Aura. I don't know if it's on on your radar, Evan, but James Gutierrez is kind of like one of the really savvy, operators and CEOs in the space. He founded Opportune, which is now a publicly traded company. Then he shifted over to Aura, and the whole concept was to provide access to very small dollar loans and kind of try to disrupt the payday loan industry in a way that helps people build credit. Obviously, payday loans, those companies don't, have to report to credit bureaus. So they're not solving that real problem, which is that if people need access to capital, the only way to do that is to demonstrate their credit worthiness. And the only way to demonstrate your credit worthiness in America is a FICO score. And in order to have a good FICO score, you need, it's kind of like this chicken or the egg issue, right? Like you need to actually have credit in order to build one, right? So that first step, that first barrier is you need to either like have a securitized credit card or something like that, or have someone kind of take a chance on you. But it's this big, like by endorsing or co-signing a credit card or something like that. But it's a huge problem that a lot of people are trying to solve, and I'm wondering if that's in your mind as like the next step, right? First, it's like credit education is really, really important. But then that leap to access to capital is super important too, right? Have you guys thought about that at all? Or is that something that is in the pipeline? Or, I mean, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So like Kiddie Kredit for us is phase 1. Like no matter how dope we build it to be, it's intended for kids ages 4 to 12 to just, you turn 14 and there's no product for you. It's like a wildly irresponsible business model, right? To like just leave you on your own until you turn an adult. So the way that we see it is we want to eventually build out a platform for teens and first-time credit users where we can issue a credit card using a learning journey as your methodology for approval. Right. So like there's some cool things out. Like now you have like plate integrations where people can issue credit where it's essentially kind of a no credit check, but they're still checking your banking history. Steps in the right direction for sure. But still unfair to the 16% of Americans that are unbanked and the 6% that are unbanked. Right. So we want to say like we can de-risk credit issuance based off of what you've learned, not necessarily what you've earned. So that's kind of where we go with that. And then if you combine those two products together, where it's Kiddie Kredit 4 to 12, platform for teens and first-time credit users, which we're working on now, those two things together are kind of a credit education ecosystem, which can then be replicated in global markets where credit is either new or non-existent. So that's why we always say, like, when you look at it through the lens of credit, like our North Star as a business, it's totally different from our peers in the space. I hate saying the word competitors with them because I truly feel like through the lens of credit, they're not. Through the lens of financial literacy for kids, they are. But yeah. And to bring up the last point too, what you were saying. So like the two things I was saying, so there's for growth, B2B2C, lower acquisition costs, not trying to charge the parents. But then lastly, we do feel that having a second organization kind of pushing the use of it, because it can be a chore to get parents to track chores. It can be very helpful. So thinking about it like that, like if you're a parent and somebody's using Google Classroom and your kid says, hey, track my track my grades on Google Classroom and you don't like it, you'll deal with it. And then by the end of the year, you're like, it's not so bad. But if there's nothing secondary and forcing you to use it, then, it can help.
Evan, I have a question for you. Like I think you and I had talked about this offline at one point, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on how there had been a proposal floated a few months back by the Biden administration about doing a government-run credit rating system. And I know that there's a ton of the existing systems, the Equifaxes, the whatever, TransUnion, all these other things are like sort of fraught with bias and other things like that built in. Do you think a centralized or a central government-run alternative to these would be a good idea and make sense for sort of evening or leveling the playing field a little bit?
It's interesting. I've definitely tried to get smarter on the topic by talking to some of the people I know at Equifax about it. But when you think about it, it's for this system to be run, they're going to be hiring people that are already within the credit bureaus themselves to run it, right? So, and if it's just done unilaterally with the government, like I don't know if there's what types of checks and balances can exist as if it's like from the private sector. So I think there has to be some sort of meetings of the minds, but I don't know. The only thing I would say about it too is like I would not want our credit system to be politicized. So if you think about like how a score is, and then if we're in a red era or a blue era, it means different things for different demographics.
I guess the reason I was curious about this is because like a lot of the current system is based on borrowing history, right? And like a lot of groups of folks aren't borrowing on public markets or in traditional banking systems and stuff like that. And so that ends up being a detriment to them. Or culturally, they think of debt as a bad thing, right? When I was growing up, my parents were petrified of any form of debt. Like they rushed to pay down their mortgage as fast as possible, and the idea of a loan for anything, for a business, for a car, for whatever, was all seen as like horrible or like a scary beast, right? So and I'm sure there's millions of other folks out there like that. And so those people aren't building their credit, right? Because they're not taking out, like, I don't think my dad, maybe he just recently got a credit card at 75. Like he's used a debit card his whole life, because he didn't want to like use other people's money. Or if something was more expensive than he had saved, he thought it was irresponsible to buy it, like,
that's straight immigrant mentality for sure.
Yeah, that's what, like, he grew up poor, right? My dad was one of 11, right?
Yep.
With a single income, and then his father died when he was 20, right? So like that mentality was burned into him of like, there's no money to go around, like, so like you can't, and borrow, who was going to lend to them, like a poor family like in Philadelphia in the 60s, right? Like that didn't exist, but no. And so like, sorry for this sort of roundabout tangent, I end up doing that a lot, but it seems to me like there could be some value in having maybe it's a nonprofit organization of some sort that runs their own credit rating system, because at the end of the day, like, at least in like Wall Street and other things like that, like the credit rating bureaus all have conflicts of interest going on as far as like how they determine the rules to assign values and all that stuff. And like we could go into another conversation another time about like how I find credit default swaps and CDOs and all these other things that led to the 2008 financial crisis to be horrifying things, but those were all products of credit rating agencies. And again, I went on another tangent.
No, that's my point. It's like credit alone is its own conversation, right? Like it doesn't have to be grouped into the whole thing. But like I think one of the, if things just stayed as is, one of the more fair things that we can do is around the lens of just traditional rent reporting, utility bills, things of that nature, things that are going to be like pretty standard across the board. So, the direction of what we're doing with this, I agree with it being its own standalone organization. But being through the government, we've seen how if we can make masks feel political, just imagine how credit could be. So I don't
I hear you.
I
I hear
don't
you.
know.
And like, look, I'd be terrified if like my government credit score was dinged because I don't own guns or something, right? Or whatever
It's
the
just I don't
the
I don't know what
trendy
the
thing of the month is, right? Or the
yeah.
year, right? So
So, Evan, what can kind of give you the opportunity to put out an ask? How can the Miami tech and startup community help? What are you working on right now? Anything? Intros?
Um, I think we're just, we're plugging away, as we get into, I think our ecosystem is pretty smart around fintech. And, the closer people get towards our project and they kind of see like where we're going, they realize there's some real financial products that we have coming along the way, but like a lot around regulatory and compliance things like I'm learning day by day as I talk to some of the, banking as a service and credit card as a service providers. So people that are just smart around that space. Sure, I don't want to be the founder that just comes up on here and says, we're raising if you know investors, but we are raising. So if you know investors,
No, please
but
do.
but on the flip side of that, Maria, you're doing this too. So with being a scout for Florida funders and stuff, my main reason for doing that is, being co-founder of the Black Men Talk Tech Conference. Some of the founders that we have apply and the ones that win the pitch competitions, like we see them so early and then they start killing it. It's like they're coming out like, no, like they've been killing it for years. So like just being able to spotlight that, when I think of like addressing things, like it's like how can you like actually like move the needle? And it's like when I, if in a year's time I looked at the portfolio and I saw that some of the teams that were funded looked like me, then I'd I'd feel good about that, So
Yeah, Evan,
I would.
let's unpack that because that's a super important topic. I don't think we've talked enough about on this podcast. What do you think the state of Black founders and operators and people trying to change the world in tech is today? And I'd love your like honest, no bullshit. This is really like it's broken and we got to fix it, or way better than 5 years ago, or like what I don't want to assume I know the answer to this. I'd love your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I would say 30,000 foot view is terrible, right? Like just look at the numbers, and it's like that's the percentage of the population is nowhere near reflective of the percentage in tech. But I mean, you have to look at like the origin of where these things started, right? And tech is all about community building anyway. So the community that initially built it wasn't the community, then it's not going to be the community that's expanding. So, but I do think the numbers are moving. I think we focus solely on more Black founders and more Black VCs. But where I think we can really move the needle is like those first hires. So like when companies get a seed round or a Series A, like who are they hiring in those first, like employee 6, 7, and 8 at said unicorn end up forming their own angel group and then like funding. So it's like, it's cool to like you don't have to like fund every single Black company known to man. Nobody's saying that, but like if you just be mindful about like every step of the way, like having representation, like who's on your cap table in the round, who's on your board of directors, like when you hire, like your first key hires that are going to have significant equity in the business and will then be able to create generational wealth. Like those first couple hires, like if you just take a little bit more time and try to have more diversity and inclusion in those decisions, not doesn't have to be the final hire, but just the decisions alone, like you can really change your trajectory of generational wealth for like communities. There's a lot of people that first generation Americans or people that just that generationally gone through poverty, like them being employee number 6 at some unicorn, like goes a long way for, for generations to come. So just thinking about, just being mindful at every step of the way, like, are we doing our part? And I think there's more ways of doing that than just, taking Aunt Jemima off the syrup bottle. Like it's like actually like we can actually focus on things that move the needle. So and that's a conversation that we all need to be responsible for.
Yeah. Talk a bit about, you're the co-chair of Black Men Talk Tech conference. Talk a bit about the overall, the goal there, right? What do you think the importance of that organization is, and a little bit about what the mission is there?
Mm-hmm. It's more about representation and spotlighting. It's not about, this isn't a like place where it's just fully like venting, like, oh, this is what's going on. It's like, no, like there's super dope founders, there's super dope investors, there's super dope upcoming entrepreneurs with great ideas, and there's super humble, talented people that would love to get into tech and just want to understand more. And it's easiest for them to understand it from people that look like them, that is a key part for us, right? And then with that conversation, in itself, it's like I have people that are like, oh, I can't go. I'm like, why? Like, oh, I'm not Black. Like, nobody said if you're not a Black person, you can't go to Black Men Talk Tech. Like it's really just about, like, nobody would say that at a woman's conference. Like, you'd be there in support of the woman, knowing you're not a woman, right? So like it's really built for allies in the community.
People do ask me like, oh, can I come to the Women in Tech events? And actually, we try not to let anyone but women come. But no, okay. I see your point.
It's like what we don't want to do is make it feel siloed to the point where then nobody wants to support, right? So like there's its intended base. And then it's like, if you're looking to figure out how can you help the intended base of the conference, feel free.
So when is the next one?
So we typically have them in October. So the first one we did in person. We did it at Penthouse at Riverside Wharf. The second one, we did it virtually. Like, we went through, last year was just a free for all for everybody in the conference space. Like we had had a grand plan for like last year. We were gonna have it at East, and then we're like, okay, we can't. We need to. I was super optimistic about COVID. I was like, guys, it's just a cold. Like, it'll take like 3 weeks. We'll be fine. And then it got to June, and I think Miami's always misrepresentative of how the world is like dealing with COVID. But like, I was like, I think we'll be fine. Maybe we should consider a hybrid. And then once we realized there wasn't really an end in sight, we're like, we'll do it completely virtual. So I say all that to say, I think this year we will end up doing it in person and look for it to be around October, just depending on how things go. Knock on wood.
So can we put a call out for potential sponsors to
Absolutely.
reach out to you?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. How should they get in touch with you?
You can reach out for Black Men Talk Tech inquiries, Evan at blackmentalktech.com, and for Kiddie Kredit, Evan at kiddykredit.com.
You heard it here. If you're writing checks, if you have the check writing handout and you want to invest in a revolutionary company that's truly changing what I think is kind of like the secret sauce of the economy, right? Like, if you're not anybody, you're not a participant unless you have good credit, and everything stems from there. And I think that's so important what you're doing, Evan. I really appreciate you joining the pod with us. This was an awesome episode. This is your home. Whenever you want to join the pod again, feel free to reach out, and we'll continue this conversation. But congratulations on all the success so far, and we're rooting for you, man. I think this is going to be a really neat company to see grow.
Thank you. I appreciate John and Maria, Brian. You already know it's always good to see you all, and Cesar, it's a pleasure to connect with you here.
Absolutely, man. Awesome. Well, with that, we'll wrap episode 13 of the Miami Tech Pod. Please rate and subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app, and visit us on Twitter at Miami Tech Pod. We'll see you next week.